Welcome to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, the leading weekly show for Australians who want to learn how to unlock their full self, health and wealth potential. I'm your host, Bushy Martin, and each week I go deep with the best investors, experts, leaders and founders to find out what it takes to break free from the grind, discover freedom and to live by design. Subscribe now and join me and get invested in the life that you really want. Let's get started.
Hi, freedom fighters. Do you have a property or investment strategy? And is it really a strategy, or is it just a short-term plan or a bunch of property tactics? Because every man, woman and their dog in property endlessly talks about strategy. But sadly, as I discuss in my book, The Freedom Formula, I find that strategy has become the most overused but least understood word in just about every sphere of the world today. Politicians and governments all constantly talk about this strategy or that strategy, to the point where I've become more and more convinced that it's a term that's become too often bandied around by people trying to convince others and themselves that they have some handle on the future, without really having a clue about what any of it really means. Because talking about strategy creates an illusion of someone who knows what the future will look like, and they have the winning idea on how they're going to get you there. Now, images of the Pied Piper using his enchanted magic flute to lead the mesmerised children away to destruction immediately springs to mind here. And this approach is no different in property circles. Everyone you hear and talk to seems to have the magic one-size-fits-all silver bullet winning strategy. And they say, just do as we say, but not as we do, and we're going to take you to the gold at the end of the rainbow. The old catch cries of 10 properties in 10 years, the Reno to riches, the positive cash flow, this or that, they're all headlined by the constant stream of instant overnight heroes who seem to be more interested in getting rich at your expense by selling you their books, their DIY programs, their dodgy properties in so-called hotspots, and their tickets to the next evangelical cult event that are helping you to actually create freedom on your terms. But to me, most of them smell more like investment selling gimmicks than strategies. These instant overnight self-proclaimed experts don't appear to look at what approach best suits your particular circumstances, your goals, stage of life, risk appetite, skills, time frame, and the time you have available. Because in reality, everyone's needs and situation are different and unique, which requires a different, unique strategy to help you achieve them. So for the most part, what's called strategy is either a smokescreen for a thinly veiled sales approach by many high-profile buyers, agents and others who are chasing around the internet and your socials, or it's merely a bunch of short-term property purchase tactics. But a good strategy does much more than urges forward towards a finite goal. A good strategy acknowledges your challenges and provides an approach to overcoming them. And a good strategy defines your critical challenge. Strategy selects a pathway among many options and identifies the how, why and where to help you get there. And true strategy consists of an integrated set of well-considered choices that offers you direction and control and variable options. Now compare this to a plan that just has goals, initiatives and budgets, which may be comforting, but ends up being very limiting. So from where I sit, starting merely with a plan is a terrible way to achieve your ultimate lifestyle strategy, which is what property investment is really about, as the property is just the means and vehicle to get you to your ultimate lifestyle destination. So you need to start by getting crystal clear on what exactly that looks like, the perfect day, week, month and year, in terms of what you're doing with who, when, where and why. You need to start with the end in mind, which is why we refer to our integrated strategy as your start-egy, so that you know where you want to end up before you even start. Now, in this fashion, developing your strategy means going outside of your comfort zone, your current capabilities and your understanding, to embrace change and uncertainty while synergizing other skills and abilities to help crystallize your vision. So, start-egy requires visionary creativity, imagination and personal leadership, while a plan or planning is just a limited structured process of documenting what you already know. So when I talk strategy or start-egy, I'm talking about making an integrative set of choices that positions you in a situation of your choice in a way that you achieve your vision on your terms and no one else's. And strategy involves a theory on why you want to pursue a certain direction or choose a situation over others, as well as how you're going to better achieve this by doing it this way than pursuing other options. And your vision and theory have to be coherent and integrated. They have to be doable and achievable. You have to be able to translate your vision and theory into actions for it to be a great strategy for you. So a good strategy encompasses your why, what, and how to achieve your life vision. And it's not about a static step-by-step plan or a fixed roadmap, but it's more like a variable course-correcting GPS that embraces uncertainty and accommodates internal and external changes to allow you to continuously adjust so that you can tack and pivot as necessary to realise your vision long-term. It integrates what you want to do with what you need to do, with what you're able to do, in order to navigate your way through the constant winds of change to be able to arrive comfortably at your end destination or outcome while still being able to enjoy the journey along the way. A true strategy is perpetual and infinite, not defined and short-term. And a true strategy is long-term. It talks in generations, decades, and years, not days and months. So if you or one of your property team has developed a property strategy, does it encompass everything that I've just talked about? And if not, you're selling yourself short. But how do you go about it then? Well, today you're going to find out as we rerun the great Trinity Strategy conversation and case study that I enjoyed recently with Mish on her Revolve commercial podcast, which you can check out in the show notes if you're interested in investing in commercial property further. And if my true strategy or strategy example today ignites your interest and you'd like to explore further how this might help and work for you to better achieve your lifestyle goals by creating your magnet and your compass, then feel free to book in with me for a personal solution session by clicking the links in the show notes or by booking in at knowhowproperty.com.au, where I can show you how you can develop your very own income for life strategy, as this is the start of really achieving your lifestyle vision that integrates your lifestyle with your finance capacity and your resulting property approach so that you can enjoy and achieve your version of freedom. So buckle up and enjoy my great strategy conversation with Mish.
Hello and welcome back to another one of these wonderful podcasts. I hope you are growing and learning as much as what we are. Today we have a very special guest who's been with us once before, so he's no stranger to the podcast, and I'm sure he is no stranger to most of you out there. We're very, very privileged to have Bushy Martin with us once again. Hello and welcome, Bushy.
Hey, Mish, really looking forward to the chat today. I've enjoyed the chats that both of us have shared, both on your podcast as well as the Realty Talk Show on the Property Hubs platform. So, and every time we spend some time, I walk away energized and excited. So we're really looking forward to doing the same today.
This is fantastic, and likewise. I mean, I think we've really connected on that level, and love talking to you. Love interviewing you, having these chats. Now, today we're going to be talking about the Trinity Strategy Freedom Numbers. And we are both time poor, so I'm going to say let's dive straight in. I'm going to hand the screen over to you. You're going to show us a couple of pretty pictures, and let's dive straight into it.
Excellent, Mish. Well, you're absolutely right. I'm very much a visual communicator. So a picture tells 1,000 words, and I just find it much more useful to bring this to gear. So it is, I guess, important to say that those that are either watching in or listening in, this is going to be a pretty predominantly visual presentation. I'll try and put as much around the words as I can so that those who are just listening when you're in the gym or doing the housework with your buds in your ears will get some concept, but this one's going to be well worth jumping on YouTube and having a look at the full, all singing, all dancing visual version. So, and I guess what sparked the exercise for us to get together today, Mish, was a brief chat we had when we got together on your podcast last around property strategy. And I guess I'll fair to say I get very frustrated because I think strategy is probably the most overused word in the whole property arena. and generally doesn't mean much because it's pretty limited to some pretty fundamentals. I think there's a much broader picture that needs to be considered if investors are going to achieve their long-term goals. And that's why I want to really dive in today to the sort of broader integrated strategy that we take people through to really give them a better sense of where they want to head, what's their ability to get there, and what do they need to do so the property, what they do in property, actually pulls out the bottom of that. So getting into that, I guess the key thing I just want to reinforce, and again, I know you and I are on the same page with this, I think that success in property is a long-term journey. And if we want to use an analogy, it's a bit like taking an around-the-world flight. You're going to hit turbulence. We're going to have to service the plane. There are inevitably going to be issues that we need to overcome on that journey. But if we take an approach where we know it's going to be long-term, and we make sure that if we're going to follow our freedom flight, that we are ready, able, and willing to fly before we actually strap on the seatbelt, then we're in a much better position to make sure that we sustain what's required to get there. And when I was talking about being ready, able, and willing, or getting raw, as I like to refer to it, and you'll get sick of my acronyms, Mish, because that's the only way I can remember things. But if we break raw down, very simply, are you ready in terms of the equity that you need to contribute to your property journey? Are you able in terms of the borrowing capacity that you can secure based on your income and liabilities? And are you willing in terms of mindset? So your expectations, outlooks, attitudes are really fundamental. And in fact, most investors shipwreck themselves based on the person looking at them in the mirror, not on anything else that's happening externally to that. So they're really key things to keep in mind. And I guess what I also like to say with this is that there is no one silver bullet, one size fits all approach to property. It needs to be tailored to everyone's personal situation and circumstances, because each and every one of us has different needs, wants, desires, timelines, risk appetite, and we need to take all that on board and then craft a individual strategy that's relevant to that person or that couple or family to make sure that what we're doing at the property end is actually going to be sustainable and attainable. So some really key bits there. And as I say, when it comes to strategy, I find that far too many people get caught up in the data detail these days. And Mish, I don't know about you, but I'm a firm believer that often what gets measured doesn't matter, and often what matters doesn't get measured. Yeah, I think what I'm saying there too is that for a big part of the property market now, I think we're measuring the wrong things. Yes, it can add some post-justification to something you already believe or something someone wants to convince you of, but I often think we're missing the mark in terms of the broader context around that. And I guess my own view is that if you're really clear on where you're heading and where you want to end up, which is a fundamental starting point that most people don't even think about, by the way, then we can craft the instrument panel and the navigation system to help us get there. So it's really starting with the end in mind and working backwards to what we need to do today in the context of our capacity that's going to help us reach whatever that long-term lifestyle goal is. And I need to stress here that it's more a GPS, not a roadmap, because roadmaps are very finite and very binary. Life isn't like that. Everything changes. The property conditions change, our lifestyle needs change, our circumstances change. So we need to create a bit of a GPS that's going to allow us to get blown off course at certain times, but still track back to what the end destination needs to be.
So, Bushy, that's a little bit of a contradiction in terms that you're saying know what your outcome is, but you're saying the path to get there, allow yourself a little bit of flexibility, in other words. So it's not exactly the golden goose that's always going to lay the golden egg. You need to have a look at it a little bit outside of the box in order to achieve that goal. But so long as that goal stays your primary focus, there are a lot of influences along that road, let's say. Hence you're saying GPS and not necessarily a roadmap.
Yeah, there needs to be some adaptability and flexibility in the system because, I'm sure if I spoke to you today, Mish, and I spoke to you 10 years ago, you'd have a very different view of what you were doing and where your life was heading. And at the same time, external conditions that are beyond everyone's control, particularly in the property market with the so many dynamics, are constantly changing. So we need to be able to pivot and adapt to that. But if we're still clear on where we want to end up, then that GPS is going to bring us back on track and allow us to accommodate those changes and still not miss the prize at the end. So that's a key bit. And I guess what that translates to, for me, strategy comes in three integrated parts. And I call it the Trinity Strategy because this is where I think that people need to start. And again, I'm a shogger for play on words, but strategy is just I've adapted that to strategy because if you're clear on where you're heading from where you start, then you're much more likely to bring the key bits together. And it's also important to paint everything out on paper first. So build it on paper before you build it in reality is, I guess, what I'm saying, by looking at all the key elements that need to make that up. And for us and the people that we've assisted, there's three key elements to strategy. And the first one of those is getting really clear on what your lifestyle strategies and goals. That then, because that's going to help you to get really clear on what do you want to do, but also what do you need to do. So if we start there with that very clear indication of that, we then need to overlay that with the finance strategy, which is all about what can you do? Because there's often a gap between what you want to do and what you need to do and what you can do. And the combination of those two will start to determine the property strategy that then complements those two to achieve them within the capacity constraints you have. And that will start to dictate what type of property, what type of location, what sort of ownership structure that's going to assist you to get there. And it's not fixed either. So where you start with the type of properties is going to evolve and change as you circle closer towards that end destination. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But if we keep that sort of Trinity strategy in play, so that what we're really trying to do is make sure that we get crystal clear on something that motivates us and becomes the magnet for us to want to crawl over broken glass to make it happen. But it's also a compass in the context that it then starts to dictate the decisions we make day to day. So if you're making a decision, is that going to take you closer to where you want to get? Or is it going to take you further away? So it builds in that sort of GPS once we're clear on those things.
So that lifestyle is ultimately where you see yourself perhaps in retirement or post-work, or how long you want to work for, working for a job versus the job working for you. And that lifestyle is where you picture yourself in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever it is. So I think a lot of people maybe look at that and they look at the short-term goal within 5 years and they forget about the rest because they think the rest is just going to follow on. I'm sure you're going to drill down a little bit more into that, but I think it's very important just to help people understand that lifestyle is ultimately where you are at those stages through your life.
And so spot on. Yeah. Nailed that in a nutshell. And it's I guess I'm an ex-architect and I know you're a graphic designer years ago. So I think it's almost innate in both of us to be able to imagine very vividly how we want things to look and be. But for a lot of people, and I've spoken to thousands of investors over the years now, when I ask the question, what's your perfect life look like? Very few can give me any sort of answer. In fact, the general response is, well, no one's actually asked me that and I've never thought about it. So I'm really going to challenge everyone listening in today to take some time. And I've, in my book, The Freedom Formula, I devote a whole chapter to getting clear on your why, your values and your vision. And I give my own example plus a bunch of other examples of the fun process that you can have in doing it. And it's not something you just do once. I mean, Sonia and I do this every year because as part of that GPS, we check back in. What's changed in our life? What's changed in our portfolio? Do we need to restructure the finances and what does that mean to us in terms of what we need to be doing from this point? So that becomes the real magnet, but it's then informed by the finance strategy which determines capacity, and those two then drive and direct the property strategy that falls out of us. So let's drill into those and get into the nitty-gritties, because I've got sort of put together a case study of a typical Aussie hardworking investor family and what that means to them in that context. So what I'm going to do there, I'm going to drill into just to run through the scope of what we're going to touch on today. We're going to start with that lifestyle strategy in terms of where are you heading, what do you want to do. We're then going to look at the capacity strategy through the finance element in terms of what can you do, and we're going to apply what I call the bare facts approach to that. So, and that's Grizzly Bear. So if you break Grizzly Bear down, the bear is B for borrowing, Z for equity, A for affordability, and R for risk. Those two then will then really drive what you're doing in the property arena. So let's jump in and get into that. And it's important to say right from the get-go that everything I'm talking about in the frameworks that I've developed comes straight out of my book, The Freedom Formula, which has been in play for quite some time. And that's built around 8 key principles in a 6-step process, which I call the property well process. It's something that's worked extremely well for my good wife, Sonia, and I, and the couple of thousand investors we've helped over the last 20 years. And I'll be breaking down the first 3 components of that 6-step process as we go through today. So jumping into that, where I always start with people, Mish, and this is probably something that you talk to investors about as well, is do you want to be rich or do you want to be wealthy? Because it's a big difference between the two.
Yes.
And most Aussies are rich. We've got great incomes which allow us to enjoy great lifestyles. But if that work income turned off today, most Aussies couldn't afford to sustain their current lifestyle for much more than days or weeks. Some months, very, very few years. So for me, investing in property is not about property or the money. It's actually about time, because you're not really wealthy until you've got time on your hands and you can devote your time to doing what you like, when you like, with who you like, where you like, without your income needs requiring you to generate them. So there's a big difference between being rich today and wealthy long term. And as I say, the key element of that is time. For me, it's always been about time. I want to free up time to do stuff like this, talking with you today, and having the assets that are going to give us the residual income that's going to look after our financial needs while we're putting our energy into things that are really important. So that's key. So jumping into the lifestyle strategy is part 1. And again, just echoing that 6-part process that we talk about on the property wealth cycle, then what I normally see, and I want to compare this to what I see a lot of people doing, and a lot of people rock up to talk to someone about property, and you ask them, why are you investing in property? And I generally get the following answers. I want to make more money. I want to save some tax. I want to retire a bit earlier and a bit more comfortably. I want to secure my family's future. And I want to get 10 properties in 10 years, which excuse my French, I refer to as the biggest ego syndrome that I get to see if you're a Monty Python fan. For me, all of those answers are just a dream wish list. They're a bunch of motherhood statements that don't mean anything. We need to define in real terms the why, the what, the who, the when, and the how. And that's going to then drive the type of approach you need to take to property. Where I normally start, as I mentioned earlier, Mish, is with the question, how much is enough? How much is enough for you to live the way you want? Because once you've attained that, the rest is frivolous. I saw my good father working himself to death, chasing money. And I saw his body fall to bits in the process, and he died far younger than he should have done, and he spent the last 10 years of his life dribbling out the side of his mouth in a wheelchair with mum looking after him. And that's because he never put some time into working out how much is enough to live the way he wanted. So
I guess that just goes back to what we've spoken about before, which is focus on the end first, focus on the end in mind, and work backwards that way. So it falls smack into what you're talking about, those 3 elements of working out.
Spot on. And I guess the key elements there are really spend some time contemplating what's your why. What really turns the lights on for you? What do you get really excited about? And that needs to be underpinned by getting really clear on what your values are. Because a lot of people don't even know what their own values are. And if you don't do things in accordance with their values, and you'll shipwreck yourself without knowing it. And those two then inform what your life vision needs to look like. So I'm going to encourage everyone to spend some time, take a day out with your wife or partner or whatever it might be, and really have some fun putting some colour around what your perfect day, week, month, year looks like. Because once you've got a clear understanding of that and you're excited about it, then two things happen. As I say, you walk over broken glass to make it happen. So you'll have the persistence and persistence to stay the course. But also, it's very easy then to monetize that and work out how much that lifestyle costs per year, which will then determine what sort of income-producing nest egg you need to create. And once you know what nest egg you need to create over what timeline, then it's pretty easy to craft a property strategy that you need to implement to make that happen. So again, as you said, start with the end in mind and start on that journey and get very visual with it. What I'm showing on the screen now is the vision board I put together back in the late 90s, Mish. And as I say, I'm a very visual person, always have been. But what's really interesting is that, and I'm one of those nutcases who had it on the toilet door and in the shower on, that 6 places around the house. I still have it, actually, that I referred to, and it almost becomes subliminal. But if you are referencing that direction often enough, then it's amazing how those things start to come into your life. And you're almost, by subconscious, are attracted to making it happen. So just about everything on that board has actually occurred for Sonia and I. About the only thing I haven't ticked yet is singing with Sting. I'm a mad Sting fan, Mish. So if you know anyone that knows Sting, let me know. I might end up in a wheelchair myself by the time I'm doing some a cappella with him. But that's still on the goal list to do that at some point down the track.
Oh well, that you know what they say: if you don't reach high, you'll never get to leave the ground. So you got to reach high. You got to keep that dream going. You never know; Sting might come knocking on your door one night.
Absolutely. You just never know how that's going to happen. Because I guess the key there is once you're clear on that vision, as I say, you've got a sense of how much that lifestyle costs. Then you can start plotting out the freedom numbers, as I call them. And just to put some context around that, Mish, there's been a lot of work done on this by myself and others over the years. What is a reasonable income that's going to sustain a comfortable lifestyle? Now, if you look at the Australian Superannuation Federation's numbers, the age pension at the moment for a couple is worth about $35,000 a year. Well, without boring you, that's a very lean existence.
Skinny. That is very, very skinny. Very
skinny indeed. They say that a comfortable existence is around $80,000 a year. I would tend to differ. I've sat down and budgeted this, and I think to have a reasonable existence where you can have an overseas holiday and a couple of interstate holidays, eat out regularly, a decent car, enjoy some good wine and clothes and a decent haircut, frequent leisure activity, not have to worry about the heating and cooling bills at home, and being able to renovate and update your home every 20 years, along with the old private health insurance. That's a minimum of about $120,000 a year for a couple, and that's assuming that they've got no home loan at that point in time. So in today's dollars, about $120,000 for a couple is the minimum you should be thinking about. But I, again, challenge the listeners to dive in a bit deeper and have a really good look at how they like to live, because what I want to do now is actually work through an example of a couple. And I'm just going to call them, they're mythical. This couple doesn't exist. So I need to stress that. And we're talking about Jessica and Michael. They are a couple. Jessica's the main breadwinner. She's a senior civil engineer with a consulting firm. Michael, and she's earning $195,000 a year. Michael works part-time and spends a lot more time with their 2 kids to support Jessica and her endeavours. He's a public servant that works 0.6 FTE, and he's earning $75,000 a year. In terms of their assets, they've got about 100 and Jessica's got about 140 grand in super. Michael's got about 95 in super. They've got savings sitting in their offset account against a home loan of about 90 grand, and their home's currently worth about 1.2 mil. In terms of liabilities, they've got a home loan of about 615,000. They've got a credit card with a 10 grand limit, and they've got a couple of kids in there that they're not quite into their teens at this point in time. So using them as a sort of starting point, and sitting down with them to get them to work through the guys. And again, before I do that, for anyone who would like to put some shape around your why, I'm happy to offer Chapter 14 of the Freedom Formula for anyone who emails you, Mish. It takes you through the process. You can have some fun with it and start to put some shape around it. So anyone who wants to do that, happy for them to either email you or email me.
That's fine. I'd love to see what that is. So if anybody would like that offer that Bushy's making, feel free to send it through to us at sales@revolvecommercial.com.au, and we'll send that back to you. Right.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's jump in, starting to get some shape around their goals. So having had the chat to Jessica and Michael, they want to be in a position where they don't have to work, which is different from not working, but they don't want to have to work in 15 years' time. They may choose to work if they want to, but not have to. And in terms of a lifestyle income, they've sat down and worked out that they need a 200 grand a year to give them the sort of lifestyle that they need.
So, Bushy, just to go back, you're saying 15 years, they were 41 and 44. So we're looking at 55 to 60, age 55. Okay.
Yeah, they won't be able to access their super in 15 years' time, which again, a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, okay, well, I'll just work for in their 30s or early 40s. I only want to work another 10 or 15 years. The super's locked away until you're 60. So you want to keep that in the back of your brain, because there may be a gap between the date when you want to stop work and when the super kicks in to support that as well. So, and I'll show some numbers around that in a minute. But 200 grand a year is what they think they need. As a rule of thumb, for those that might be listening in, if you look at your current incomes, then about 80% of that income will sustain the same sort of lifestyle if you don't have a home loan attached. So assuming you get to the point where you don't want to have to work and you've paid off your home, then about 80% of your income will sustain the same sort of lifestyle that you're currently enjoying. Now, again, I probably need to reinforce here, Mish, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a financial planner. All the figures that I'm going to share with are very general in nature. The forecasters and the number crunching I've done are basically what I've done personally. It worked very well for me, and we use those tools for the investors that we look after, but they're not set in stone. They do need to be checked by an independent financial planner or an accountant to verify and validate and make sure it fits in with their specific individual situations. But as a guide and as a bit of an indicator, it's a sort of general approach that you need to take, it'll start some shape around that. Now, the other key question that needs to be worked in here is how much per week are they comfortable investing? So Jessica and Michael are happy to put $400 a week towards their ongoing strategy, and their current position we've already gone through in terms of the assets and liabilities, so nothing to talk about there. What that starts to inform is what I call the Freedom Forecaster, Mish, and the Freedom Forecaster is a very fairly simple generic indication of where you're at, and where you're going to end up. And I look at that in two formats with the people that we assist. One is if you do nothing differently, where will you end up? Because if doing nothing differently to what you're doing is going to get you to where you want to, you don't need to do anything different. But if there's a gap between that and where you would like it to be, what is the gap and how are you going to bridge that gap? So putting some shape around that, what you're now seeing on screen is the download of the face of the Freedom Forecaster, and it covers off on some key numbers. So starting with if you do nothing differently, where you're going to end up.
Bushy, what you've got on the screen, just for our listeners, is basically a template a spreadsheet that you've obviously worked out your calculations, your numbers that you work with within the Freedom Forecaster, that you plug your clients' numbers in there and have a look at what their outcome is and where they need to go. Is that right?
Absolutely right. And it covers off on some pretty key numbers. So I mentioned the lifestyle income for Jessica and Michael of $200,000. Their break-free timeline is 15 years, so they want to be in a position where they don't have to work in 15 years' time. And in very simple maths, and I'll go through the assumptions as we talk about this, to give you $200,000 a year in ongoing income based on a 5% net return, you're going to need an income-producing asset base of $4 million at that point in time. And I also need to stress here that $4 million excludes the family home, because the family home doesn't give you an income, it actually costs you money.
So you're talking about $4 million in investments, $4 million of asset, value of asset, basically.
Yes.
And you've said at 5%, which is very reasonable in today's market, a 5% net yielding asset, correct?
Spot on. And I'd like to be very pretty conservative with these estimates, because I'd like the reality to be better than this. But let's plan for the worst and hope for the best. So 5% is pretty achievable. Yeah. But let's start there rather than get too optimistic about it. And then we have a look at, okay, well, what are Michael and Jessica's current assets? And as I mentioned, their combined super is about $235,000, but in 15 years' time, they can't access it. So that's locked away until they're 60. Over and above that, all they've got to their name really is the $10,000 in shares and the $90,000 in savings. So they actually haven't got much in their hand at this point in time. So projecting forward over the next 15 years based on the average growth rates for cash and for shares, and then subtracting inflation from that number. So I'm using 2.65% as the average inflation rate, and that's what the inflation rate's been on average over the last 30 odd years here in Australia. It's not that at the moment, but it's on track to head back to that fairly soon. They're going to end up in 15 years ex-super with about $113,000. And if you convert that $113,000 at 5%, that's going to give you $5,600 to survive on. Not very much. Not a great start.
No, not a great start. And particularly if you're in your mid-40s and you're looking at that, I'd say their biggest problem is time.
Spot on. Absolutely spot on. So they've got some challenges right off the cuff. But let's project that forward. If we take that forward an extra few years, say 19 years, when they can both access their super, assuming that they continue to contribute to their super and it grows at the average rate of super over the last 30 odd years, then their nest egg at that stage is going to be worth about 1.1 mil or just under 1.2 mil. And again, at 5%, that's going to give them about $58,000 a year to survive on. So a big difference between those two. What does that mean then in terms of the gap, Mish? So if we project that out, that means that in 15 years' time, they're going to be about 3.8 mil short of that 4 mil that they need to survive on. But that's in 15 years' time. So if we take inflation off that to get it back to what does that mean in today's dollars right here, right now, that equates to just under 1.8 mil, which in property terms, if we look at it in residential terms, it's 3 or 4 properties. In commercial properties, it's probably 1. Yeah, you would know that better than me. It might be 1 or 2. Yeah. That sense. So I guess while that headline number sounds a bit scary to start with, if we break it down into property terms, 3 or 4 properties or 1 or 2 commercial properties is generally quite achievable for most hardworking Aussies.
Very much so. And I think just having a look at these numbers with where their serviceability is, this should be very doable for a couple like this. So long as they do have a little bit of a nest egg to kickstart them off, most certainly in resi, kickstart in resi, and then go into commercial. Because, I mean, resi is going to give you that market growth. The one thing that you mentioned a little bit earlier was within 15 years that they'd have to continue or it was 19 years, you mentioned that they would have to continue contributing to their super in order to facilitate their goal. Well, the big question is, if it is 19 years, they'd still be working. So essentially, they wouldn't have achieved the no work zone. And now they're tipping into the super as opposed to the super automatically growing organically through investments, properties, whatever vehicle they choose to go into.
Spot on, absolutely spot on. So what this does immediately is starts to put some shape around where people are heading. And again, it's all about starting to define the goalposts. And the goalposts can change, but if you don't even have any goalposts, you don't even know where you're kicking.
Sure, you need to start somewhere.
Spot on. So there's a good starting point. So if we summarise those freedom numbers, the lifestyle income's $200,000 a year. 4 million is the nest egg number they need to generate that's going to give them that. 15 years is the timeline, the break-free timeline that they've decided on. If they do nothing differently, they're going to end up with just 5.6 grand a year to survive on. The gap in 15 years' time is just under 4 mil. And if we break that down into what that means today, if they went and bought $1.8 million worth of income-producing assets, which might be three or four resi properties or 1 or 2 commercial properties, then the job will be done. So there's a starting point.
Bushy, this is almost like these are fantastic. I mean, the numbers that you've just mentioned here, I think are really, this is a real wake up and a shake up, I reckon, for if not 80% of the nation, because realistically, in your mid 40s, they always say you're learning in your 20s, you're growing in your 30s, and you are achieving in your 40s. So your 40s are really there, when you're achieving best, doing best at your work, your job, when you're being paid. So $200K a year, happy days. But what you've just shown is if you're not actually doing something with your time and your money, that by the time you get to your retirement age, that time's gone. You've lost that money,
100%. And interestingly enough, Mish, I've done a fair bit of research on this. According to ABS figures, the average income that retirees over the age of 65 are currently surviving on in Australia is just over $15,000 a year on average. Now that's under $300 a week, Mish.
It is.
The reason that it's there is that they don't qualify for the pension because their assets, they've got enough assets to knock that out, but they don't have enough assets to generate the income they need to survive. So they're in no man's land. And most Aussies are in this position. The ones who kid themselves that putting money into super and then paying off the home loan is going to give them a decent retirement, they're in for a massive shock. They're either going to have to work until they drop or live on the smell of an oily rag and a diet of toast and 2-minute noodles.
So Bushy, this is almost like one of those bark moments. If you guys are watching this and you're in your late 30s, heading 40s, into your 50s, and you're not investing and you're not doing what you need to do to think about your later years, this is a big bop signal. It's like a boat smashing through a harbour wall, really. You really got to be doing something about it now. I think the biggest problem is a lot of people don't know where to start and how to do this. Spot
on. And we might come back to that at the end, Mish, in terms of how you and I can assist them, start educating them on, giving them the confidence to start that journey. So that's awesome. So that really starts to put some shape around the first element of the Trinity Strategy, and that's your lifestyle goals and the freedom number support it. Now that we've got a bit more clarity around what we want to do and what we need to do, let's have a look at what Jessica and Michael can do based on their finance strategy. So jumping into that, and again, going into the second element of the second stage of the property wealth series, which is examining your capacity. Then, as I keep saying, Mish, and you've probably heard me say this before, I've found that through the school of hard knocks that property is definitely a game of finance. And the finance is really important, not only in cost, which is what most people focus on, but it also has a massive impact on capacity and on risk. And if you don't structure things well and you don't access the right finance solution, strategy and structure to suit you, you can be dudding yourself out of thousands of dollars a year and hundreds of thousands in wealth down the track. So what I normally say to people is, well, let's apply the bare facts to your position using that BAR to start putting some shape around what that looks to you. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at this in the context of Jessica and Michael that we spoke about, and really drill down on what the bare facts equal in number terms for them. So going through that, I'm not going to bore you with too much of this because we don't have time today, Mish, but in terms of looking at your finance, there's a whole bunch of things that you really need to be aware of right up front, because I see way too many investors who are cross-securitized, they've got all their lending with one bank. What they don't realize is that that's really upping the risk, but it's also minimizing their flexibility capacity and also reducing what they can do in property by putting all their cards in the hands of the one lender.
It's never mind putting their cards in the one hands of the one lender. It's never mind the hands. It's handcuffing you. It is,
and limiting. And putting yourself in a situation, if things go wrong, the bank can come take the keys to everything. So in very simple terms, I do suggest people that the biggest asset you have as an investor is your borrowing capacity, not the rate. So go for reach, not rate, firstly, but also work with a lender who has realistic valuers and not conservative, pessimistic valuers, because they can dud you out of a lot of equity. They can also reduce your purchase price power. So make sure you do that. And then adopt a multi-lender structure where each property and each loan is independent of every other property and every other loan, so that you control what's happening with your properties and you do what you want when you want, not allow the banks to control that process to minimise their risk. So I could talk about that for an hour, but we'll do that another time. And that results in a multi-lender structure where we have principal interest on the home loan, interest only on everything else. We bolt on offset accounts onto every loan facility, and there's good reasons for doing that. But again, protect your capacity and your tax deductibility. And by doing that, what we're doing is we're setting up a war chest facility that we call an equity line against the home initially, that minimises your exposure. It separates non-deductible from investment debt, and it also builds in the rainy day reserve. So one of the things that I'm red hot on is making sure that people have got 6 months worth of their living expenses tucked away in a tax deductible format, where if you don't use it, you don't pay for it. But if the poo hits the fan and you lose your job, or the tenant doesn't run, or you get damage on a property or a combination of the above, then you're not tapping into salary and savings and hamstringing your lifestyle. You know you've got money set aside to cover that. And as a contingency, if you don't need it, it doesn't cost you a cent. So some pretty key things there. Now let's apply that approach to our friends Jessica and Michael. And again, without boring you about their financial position, because I've mentioned that already, I've used that financial position to actually determine how much they could borrow based on the current lender's appetite. We've got access to over 40 different lenders and about 2,000 different loan solutions. So based on that, of the top sort of 12 of those, Michael and Jessica could borrow a total of around about just under 1.5 million. And if you take off their existing home loan of the 615,000, they can currently borrow an extra 830 odd grand towards their investments, which if you were just looking at their borrowing capacity alone and factoring in the on-cost for stamp duties and conveyancing and all the other bits and bobs, that would allow them to have a purchase price power of about 730 grand. I've factored in Reno allowance as well as that rainy day reserve into that number. But I look at this from two angles. I look at what could they buy from a borrowing capacity perspective, what can they buy from an equity perspective, and the last of those two is going to determine what their actual achievable purchase price power is, which you're going to put some shape around in a minute.
Okay, so you're saying that their maximum purchase price would be 730K. What would you be working on as their equity? What sort of equity would they require in order to get into 730K?
Yeah, well, that's what we're about to attack next, because I'm looking at, based on buying capacity, this is what they could purchase. Let's have a look at what their equity would allow them to do. And then between those two, the lowest common denominator of both of those will actually determine what they can actually purchase. So let's put some shade around that. So jumping into the equity position, we know that based on their existing home in Victoria, let's say it's valued at 1.2 mil. We've got their $615,000 home loan. That means that if we can access an additional 345 up to about 465,000, depending on whether they take it to 80% or 90%, and how happy they are to tap into tax deductible lenders mortgage insurance. And we've also got 90 grand in offset savings that they've tucked away. So their total equity is somewhere in the vicinity of 435 up to 555. So they've got good equity. And if we translate that into what that would allow them to buy based purely on equity, then on a 90% loan against a residential property, they could secure up to $2 million worth of property. On a 70% loan for commercial, they could secure a $1.1 million commercial property. So we've seen both extremes now. We've seen what their buying capacity will allow them to do and what their equity will allow them to do. If we combine those two and we look at, and again, what you're seeing on screen there is the detailed loan structure that we would put together to actually make this happen. You can see there that because of their borrowing capacity constraints, then the maximum they could purchase a residential home combining borrowing capacity and equity would be about $740 grand for a residential, and the same for commercial. That's going to tap them out pretty much. What it means is they've got heaps of available equity once their income position improves to then go again. And it means that if they can only buy a $740,000 property now, then they're going to be just over $1 million short of the equity they need to achieve their long-term freedom numbers.
That would be the immediate. However, as market moving, as you've got so many, and I'm going to use your favorite word here, strategies, in order to create that, if they carry on working on themselves and their portfolio in order to reach their dream, to reach their goal.
Yeah, now the thing I need to preface here is that I think we're at the worst point ever in the lending environment, Mish. Rates aren't likely to go up, and if they do, there might be a minor increase to scare the horses with the inflation data. But the long-term view is that our rates are going to go down, and rates have a significant impact on your borrowing capacity. So for every rate reduction, your borrowing capacity will go up quite substantially. And in addition to that, lender policies are starting to loosen. So we're seeing lenders start to be a little bit more accommodating in terms of what they'll accept as far as borrowing is concerned, because banks are businesses as well and they need customers. So I think, what I'm talking about here is really conservative worst case. Yes. As things progress, they can secure their first property, you get them up and running and start to have equity working for them as the growth continues. And over the next couple of years, we're going to see their borrowing capacity increase again because of those changes, which will likely give them the ability to go again. Okay. So everything's heading in the right direction as far as that goes. So what that's telling us, coming back to the bare facts, 830 odd grand of borrowings, 550 grand of equity. Their property purchase price power that comes out of those two is 740 at the moment. We now need to look at their affordability. If they bought a property at $740,000, how much per week would it actually cost them? Because that affordability piece, again, is something that I see way too many investors not spend much time on. Because I think a lot of investors who just look at the purchase price and they look at the loan, they go, and they look at the rent, and they go, yeah, I can afford that. But they haven't taken in board every cost in buying and then holding the property with property managers, rates, taxes, renovation, maintenance costs, the whole kit and caboodle, and then suddenly find out the property's costing them a lot more. Gets too hard, they're starting to cramp their lifestyle, they throw their arms up, sell the property prematurely, and then don't go the full hold to actually enjoy the fruits at the other end.
Bushy, do you have a minimum? So if somebody's buying a property, I usually just throw out a minimum percentage, 5% on top of that, and I call it slush funds or grey money. So that which facilitates and accommodates the shortfall that you're talking about.
Absolutely. So, yeah, very good point. So I mentioned the war chest equity loan facility earlier that covers a shortfall of the loan plus the on costs. We build in a component of that to cover those costs, because ideally you want the investment properties to be washing their own face. In high rate times like this, you can use that war chest to cover the shortfall without having to dip into salary or savings. And it's a matter of doing the calculations on that, though, to make sure you've got that stuck away, so you're not getting any shocks after the event and suddenly cripping your lifestyle and finding it hard to meet the costs ongoing. And there's a whole series of techniques you can use to smooth that cash flow through tax variations, and I won't bore you or the listeners with that today.
It's for another show.
It is, and the entity you buy the property in and those tax variations can make a massive difference to the cash flowing of the property. But it's a matter of the devil's in the detail. If you get all those tweaks happening in concert, all of a sudden you can get a property that's looking after itself, growing in value, and you're getting on enjoying life and putting your time into friends and family. So that's key. And then part of that affordability piece is twofold, because again, using that bad acronym Mish, we like to give people's finances CPR. And that CPR, if you break it down, is about looking at the true cost, not the rate. It's about structuring things so that you're eliminating non-deductible debt years earlier and saving yourself tens of thousands of loan interest, and also minimising the risk on the way through. And again, if we look at that in the context of a quick example, from that affordability perspective, a $650,000 property with a couple with a combined income of a bit over $250,000. In today's numbers, an old existing residential property is going to cost someone just shy of $400 a week, given where things are at. A well-structured home is going to drop that from $400 a week down to about $150 a week. And a commercial property, you tell me, Mish, you can probably get into almost cash flow positive or cash flow neutral, given the yields that you can get on commercial property.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole idea of buying commercial properties is that they wash their own face. I think in the current market with the interest rates where they are, it is a little bit tight, a little bit skinny. But again, looking at the projection, we look at that over a 5 to 10 year plan, and those are cash flow properties. And those properties are going to pay you back while you sleep in a big way.
Exactly. And it's that combination of growth and affordability that investors need to focus on. So yes, get your teeth into an asset that's going to grow in value, but structure it in such a way that the cash flow is going to be affordable, and using a whole bunch of techniques that you and I can discuss at a later point, Mish. So that's the important piece. And again, to do that, when we work with investors, the first thing we do is we actually generally restructure their existing finances. And it's not uncommon to pull an extra $400 to $1,200 a month back into their pocket just by setting up the structure in the right way and having it with the right lender. And that is equivalent to a pay rise once you throw the tax in of somewhere between $7 and $20 odd grand a year, Mish.
Wow,
that's a pretty significant exercise. And by doing that, you're slicing, over 140 grand up to sort of 430 odd grand off the interest bill for the loans over the term of the loan. So, again, there's so many Australians who don't look at their loans often enough, and they are paying a loyalty tax for that privilege, big time. So that's the first stage. Let's see what we can pull out of the exercise. It's effectively going to cost you nothing, but further horsepower your ability to contribute to property. And then let's have a look at, in this case, with Jessica and Michael, based on a $740,000 property, and I've only run the numbers for a residential property here, Mish. I'll talk to you later about getting nitty-gritty on the commercial side. But given my intimate knowledge of the residential space, based on their position, and buying a property as tenants in common. So we're slanting the ownership towards Jessica, who's a higher income earner, and we're doing that on a sort of 90-10 basis. Then the out-of-pocket based on current rates, and we're using rates at around 7% here for this exercise. Then in their position, it's going to cost them in year one $334 a week. By the time we get to year 10, $227 a week. So it's going to be in that sort of sphere. But we already know that we poured a big chunk of that back with restructuring their finance. And Jessica and Michael have already told us that they can comfortably invest around about $400 a week towards their investment portfolio. So in this particular case, that works. For others who don't want to contribute that much, then it might be tougher. But it's important to have that conversation up front and early so that everyone's on the same page as far as that goes. So as I say, this is a raw, very worst case look. I've used 11% for property management. I'm putting in on a residential property $3,000 each and every year for maintenance. I'm using a 7% vacancy rate each and every year to account for a turnover of tenant. So these are really conservative worst case numbers.
So you've really beefed up all of those outgoings and numbers in the back end, and realistic. I mean, you could probably drop that by about half, I would reckon, if those are the numbers that you've put in there.
Yes, yeah. As I say, I always start worst case because there's way too many people in the property space who want to blow smoke up your backside by telling you the optimistic story rather than the real story. I tend to swing the other way, and probably too far the other way. But I would rather start there and then look like heroes when the reality hits the table, rather than give people false hope and then suddenly find out that they're burning a hole in their pocket. But that affordability analysis is really important. And again, we've got some very sophisticated software that enables us to really drill deep into that, to give investors the confidence around exactly how much a property is going to cost them before they even start to make an offer. We normally do this before we even talk to a buyer's agent, Mish, so that they've got clarity around what they can do, how much it's going to cost, and therefore have got the confidence to start talking to a buyer's agent to find the right property solution to fit that.
And again, you're looking at the end before you start, which I think is a very good idea. And bearing in mind that these numbers are going to change all the way along when you get into the actual nuts and bolts of having an asset or a property or something that you want to buy. Then you can squeeze those and you can look at what the realistic numbers are, turn that around, and you probably find that it's not as bad as what it looks on paper.
Spot on. Yeah, absolutely spot on, Ed. And again, I've just shown you worst case today, but we will normally do worst case, best case, and likely case scenarios on this so that we've got a range that gives investors a level of confidence around how that looks, and we can model it. But we can change the rates, we can change the rent, we can change the vacancy, we can change all the numbers and do some scenario testing to look at what impact is that going to have on the bottom line. So some really important stuff there. So that pretty much completes the bare facts. I'm not going to dive into the risk element because that's a discussion for another day, and we've touched on some of those risk protections in terms of the finance structure anyway. But if we sort of summarise that in terms of where Michael and Jessica can go, we know that they can secure a $740,000 property today. That being the case, in terms of applying that back to the wealth clock and back to the Trinity strategy, what we then refer to that position when we combine the freedom numbers and the bare facts is where they're at on what I call the capital growth to cash flow curve. Now, you're seeing that live on the screen there. Again, we model this for investors based on their specific situation. But very simply, if someone's projected to land below what their nest egg number needs to be, their key focus needs to be growth. If it's projected to exceed their nest egg number, then their key focus is cash flow. And they're not exclusionary, as you and I know, Mish, but it's a matter of where you put the initial priority. And as your portfolio grows, you might go for growth strongly initially, and therefore, as you mentioned earlier, invest in residential properties to get you on the ladder, because that's all the capacity is going to allow you to do. But as your equity increases and your income serviceability increases, then as you're approaching the stop work stage of your exercise, then investing in commercial properties as a strong cash flow play, but still having growth attached, is going to help fund that ongoing lifestyle. And there's no doubt that commercials are a mile ahead in terms of yield and therefore the effective cash flow that's going to put investors' pockets. So the key thing I want to reinforce here is that the strategy isn't static. You might start in growth properties, then transition into commercial. At the point where you actually pull the pin on work and you need to have it completely funded, you're likely to rationalise the portfolio. You'll do a bit of a sell down of the high growth assets to reduce some debt and hang on to or invest in other high cash flow assets that are going to fund that lifestyle down the track. And at that point, that rationalisation piece, the transition to retirement, if you want to call it that, definitely needs very close input between a finance broker and accountant financial planner in conjunction with a buyer's agent as the key members of your professional elite team. It's going to allow you to transition that effectively without, one, giving too much of your gains back to the tax office, but also, secondly, creating a series of investment vehicles that don't create another job that you need to manage. So again, the benefit of commercial property, if it's set up well and you've got a good property manager, you're getting really good cash flow with very little time input from yourself required to do that. And that time element is really key, because if you're creating a second job at the time that you pull the pin, what have you achieved? You've just substituted one form of work for another. The key thing is to have assets that are pretty much looking after themselves apart from managing your managers, and then enjoying your time as your income comes in from those assets to fund the lifestyle down the track.
And I think everything that you've said has led to one direction, and that is be asset rich. Get asset rich as early and fast as you can, and then work out those assets as Bushy says, as time goes on over the next 10 to 20 years, you can make that educated decision as to whether you're going to keep X, Y, Z assets, whether that collateral that you get out of those assets can do better in better types of assets in years to come. We don't know that. You don't know that. But the sooner, and I loved your slide on the monopoly board, because that's exactly what it is. It really is about accumulate as much as you can, as early as you can, so that you can make those decisions to either turn around, drop, sell, move, change, whatever it is. But if it's all about being asset rich right now, and not necessarily cash rich. And if you are working for your money and you're in your 30s and your 40s and you're working and you don't have those assets, I think everything that you've shown us here today, Bushy, just clearly lays out that cash rich today is not asset protection or asset rich down the line. You've got to be asset rich today. Work hard, work for those properties right now if you have to, but let those properties work for you long term. That's the end goal to the journey.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Very well summed up there, Mish. Again, we've probably just scratched the surface on what we can talk about, and that gives us plenty of opportunity to do the same again on some of the other subjects. But I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to break this down, because collectively, if we can work together to assist investors go in with clarity and confidence around what they're doing and why and where it's going to get them to, and we build it out on paper before they start, so there's no secrets or surprises with any of this, then we're going to end up with a lot more inspired, motivated and active investors that are going to secure their future than the situation today, where, as you said earlier, people don't know where to start, they don't know who to trust, and therefore what tends to happen is they do nothing.
And what you've taken us through there today, I think probably 90% of investors that come on board are absolutely clueless. They don't know what they don't know. What you've done is you've broken it up very succinctly, and you've got mechanisms and spreadsheets and programs in place that you can take them on that journey and show them exactly where they are, what they need to be. I think this is gold. This is absolutely gold. even while looking at that, I'm questioning myself in my portfolio. You really got me thinking over there. I mean, this is stuff that I think about all day, every day. But it's always good to stop every now and then. And as Bushy says, have a revisit on where you are. Relook at your compass. And is your compass still focused in the northerly direction? Because, you know, over the last 365 days, it might have swayed to the west or swayed to the east. You really need to sit down and start this all over again. You know, this is not what you put in place today and expect it to be there in 10 years' time. You need to be nurturing it. It's almost like growing a tree. You know, you need to be nurturing it, feeding it, giving it compost, giving it water, making sure that it's getting enough sunshine, all of that. So this is your tree to wealth. I think what you've taken us through here today is absolute gold. It's a wonderful offer. So, Bushy, what do you have to offer to our audience?
Well, it really simple. There's a couple of things. So if anyone watching or listening in wants to do their own freedom numbers and BFX assessment, you can book in for a personal solution session for us to take you through that. You just jump on our website, knowhowproperty.com.au, and click on the book appointment section and book in, and then you'll spend time personally with me going through that based on your particular situation. For those who want to get excited about the why and putting some shape around what their ideal lifestyle looks like, then happy to email chapter 14 of the Freedom Formula that actually takes you through that step by step. So I'll shoot you the PDF on that Mish separately, so you've got for those who contact you on that. The other couple of things, the Get Invested book, which whets everyone's appetite for the opportunity that getting invested in yourself and your future lies. We offer that free for investors through the Revolve commercial exercise, and I'm happy to send you the link to allow people to do that. But otherwise, just reach out to us if you got any questions or whatnot around that in relation to how it affects you individually. Then our team's there at the end of the phone to help you on that journey.
Okay, great. So if anybody's interested, you can reach out to Bushy directly. Feel free to reach out to us and we'll point you in the right direction. And I would strongly encourage you, no matter where you are on your journey, to reach out either which way and just go and reset your clocks, reset your timers. So Bushy, thank you very much for joining us. And I hope we're going to be doing a couple of these going into the future, and I'm looking forward to doing those. So we're going to drill down a little bit as we go. So thank you again for making the time. I know you are a very busy man, and I'm very grateful that you could join us on today's show.
Thanks, Mish. My pleasure. Love your energy. Love spending time with you, Mish.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, your home for property investment insights and inspiration. Make sure you subscribe to Property Hub for free. Get your weekly dose of Get Invested inspiration along with every episode of Realty Talk, Australia's top online property show for red-hot property investing news and insights direct from industry leaders and influencers. And finally, I'll see you next time.